Does your world feel generic and very grayscale? Kind of cookie cutter, vanilla? Well, today we're going to talk about fantastic environments, how to use them, how to create a rich and vibrant world that's filled with magic, awe, and wonder. And that might not be as difficult as you think. Well, greetings and salutations, YouTube. I am the Nemean Beard, your host and guide through this topic today, tonight, whenever you may be. So today I was actually going to do a video about NPCs, how to prep them, how to run them, but there were a couple of spoilers in that video for my players, and we had to cancel our session yesterday because of the insane amount of work that two of my players received from their professors because, they don't have other things to do, quarantine. On that, just let me say, this is crazy. Strange days we are living in. If you are an essential worker, especially in the healthcare industry, let me just say thank you and that I'm praying for you. If you maybe got laid off or you're in a rough spot, you don't know where your rent's going to come from, I'm really sorry and I'm praying for you. But at least we have coffee. So I'm going to take a drink and maybe just give you time to hit the subscribe button. This is, I think this is Green Mountain Dark Magic. It's just like grocery store brand coffee. And it's not bad. It doesn't have it's just coffee. There's no hints of this or finish of that or kind of anything like that, anything special. But it's not bad for like $6 a bag. I definitely wouldn't pay $20 a bag for it, but it's a decent brand of coffee. Check it out if you like coffee. Well, thank you if you subscribed. I had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for close to a year. My thief Valkar was 8th level or close to 8th level, and I was actually only in the group. I was one of the two originators of the Company of Stars. We named our group after our Star Dragon patron. We had acquired a keep that attracted a Sasquatch and a stone giant, along with various other dwarves, elves, humans, halflings, and they would help defend and work at our stronghold. But it was right at the end of summer, and we wanted to play D&D, but our DM Dale wasn't available, and another kid's older brother offered to DM. So we made characters, and he started us off in prison. We didn't have any equipment. My elf, I can't remember his name, but he was arrested, for being in town after dark. And there were some other things like that he just came up with kind of on the fly, I think. Nonetheless, our group is tasked with investigating a series of caves that a dwarven mining team had uncovered. So it was Suicide Squad-esque, right? We were kind of the vanguard. They had opened up these caves, and we're sent in first. As we go deeper and deeper into the mines, we see a strange bluish-green light ahead. As we enter this cavern, it seems to glow with its own light. Me being the thief, they send me to scout ahead. After a few rounds of scouting, I decide it's fairly safe where we are, and I want to find out where this light is coming up from. So it turns out the source of this light, well, the caves are actually covered in these mushrooms that glow with their own light. I remember asking, are they magical? And the DM told me, no, they're bioluminescent, just like we, have here in our world. That was the first time I heard about bioluminescence, actually. And that was kind of the first time I remember really being in awe of an environment and setting. And the DM didn't do much, but he did do something. You see, the 5th edition of D&D has what they consider the 3 pillars of adventuring. They have exploration, social interaction, and combat. And while I agree mostly with that list, I think exploration kind of gives us a framework for crafting environment. You see, what made me in awe, other than being 14 and easily impressionable, was that I was in explorer mode. And I had found the source of the light. I mean, bioluminescent fungi are cool on their own, but I discovered them. So that's kind of our first focus of the day. Discovery, the discovery of an environment. Let that be a tool. I mean, that's why we like open world games like Skyrim and Red Dead Redemption and The Witcher 3, and we just love taking in the landscape and exploring the wilds and the unknown in those worlds. Now, we can't recreate the visual experience that you have going through Skyrim or Toussaint, but we can use description. You could even use technology like maybe some art or even Google Earth. You can go to the mountain ranges on Google Earth and get like a pretty cool view and show them what they see, but that can still come off kind of flat. And so when you describe a place, I like to go just a piece at a time, like discovering a bit as they go. Now remember, your characters, excuse me, have at least five senses. What is the lighting? What do they hear? Are there any smells? Is it humid? Is it dry, cold, windy? Every description doesn't always have to engage every sense. Like that can get really monotonous if your box text just goes down the line. See, hear, smell, feel. But the reminder that they're there can really, really help the immersion. Now remember, they came to play D&D, not listen to an audiobook, so keep your descriptions to the point and crisp. Let their imaginations do the rest. I like to make note cards or post-it notes. The post-it note app on my laptop is a lifesaver. But I like to think of ways that different people might describe the environment. An elf might hear the trees sigh, or a dwarf might feel the strike of a pick or hammer on stone. Someone who lives in the north year round, they might not be bothered by the cold rain, while a tourist might both revel and be frightened by the beauty of the savage storms they see from such a high altitude. I like to think of one or two sentences that are kind of visceral statements by a few people from different walks of life, and just put them up there that way. As opposed to just me reading descriptive box text, I can use an NPC to kind of use that discovery tool as well. When William Wallace says it's great Scottish weather, the rain's falling straight down or slightly to the side. That's a great line. That's kind of what I'm talking about. One of my favorite ways to do something like this is when I have an environment idea that's kind of out of the norm, not just like, oh, you're in a mountain range or something like this. This will go for like a dungeon, right? Like, let's say you have a dwarven forge, and you want to have the forge actually a fire elemental lives in it, and that sounds cool. But you don't just tell the PCs out of the gate that there's a dwarf stronghold that has a fire elemental living in their forge. Let that out as they discover it. Maybe all the dwarves call the forge a name, and they don't realize it's not the name of the forge, but actually the name of the elemental that lives in there. So think about the reveal. Sometimes it helps to start at the end of an issue, right? Like if you have a strange temple in the mountains, or a locale of interest, sometimes it helps to think about the reveal of that and the end of it. So, things they didn't appreciate before, maybe they'll have a new take on them afterwards, like the standing stones leading up to the thing. And mystery, that's another great tool. Excuse me. In my homebrew world of Ara, there's a forest known as the Turning Wood. And it's a forest where the trees are perpetually in a state of autumn. And that's pretty cool. At least I think so. My players that have encountered it seems to think so. I've had that in my campaign for, over 15 years now. And one of the things I like to do is make maps. That's always been one of the romances of being a dungeon master and an RPG for me, right? I usually give the players kind of an artistic map at the start of the campaign. I ink them and watercolor them, and it may not be 100% accurate, but it looks cool. And it gets them thinking about, man, where am I from? What does this look like? So we did one really long-term 5e campaign. I think we ended at like 17th or 18th level. And we were about 6 months into that campaign. and they get a lead for a quest that they're on, and they have to go to where the forest. They have to go to the forest where autumn never yields to winter, and they go visit a lore master type NPC. So they kind of don't get anywhere, but then they remember the map, and one of the players remembers that there's a map that's not green, but it's like red and yellow, and he was like, what was that thing called? And so he looks, he's like, oh, it's the Turning Wood. So while they're there at this kind of, it's not really a library, but it's probably the closest thing that they'll find, right? So they do some research and they learn about the Turning Wood. Again, they discover it, but not in like a visual, experiential way. They learn about it, um, in a different way. And with that, I want to bring up just a couple sub points, right? So we have, um, the discovery aspect. We have some other different things visually, how you describe things. So we have discovery and description. But most places have more than one name. And I don't just mean names, different names for the languages, but that too, right? Like that was a big, convention of Tolkien, right? Like Moria is also Khazad-dûm, and there's a reason that happened in the lore of Middle Earth. But Moria is the contemporary name for it, Khazad-dûm, and it had another name before that. But like take Los Angeles for example, you have L.A., you have La La Land, the City of Angels, Tinseltown. Truck drivers call it Shaky Town. Same for New York, the city that never sleeps. Like that could go right in a fantasy setting. The Big Apple, the capital of the world. Eberron has Sharn, the city of towers. Neverwinter is the jewel of the north, or the city of skilled hands. Right? You can do the same with regional areas too. I remember when I first read the Fionavar Tapestry, um, guy Gabriel Kay has this line where he says, "The plains where the Dalrai ride," and I thought that was so cool. Like it evoked something, um, imaginative in me, and it still does. Now, not everything needs a proper name, but they do need a description, right? Like you could just label, an ocean part on your map, the sea where devils swim, or that an NPC could describe it like that, or the city on the edge of the world, or the house without door or window. And that brings us to our next point that I kind of alluded to before, which is lore. Lore is another great tool for exploration of an environment. Sites of ancient battles, or a place that has an adage about it. In my world, a common saying when you're asked how you're doing is to reply, better than the fields of Harran, which was the site of a brutal battle 30 years ago, and they still haven't been able to get crops to yield yet. Revelations that a place's name refers to something historical, or uh, an event that means something quite literal can be a powerful tool of communication in your campaign world, both of exploration and in even social interaction. Um, like it could be named after a famous person, like King Louis, Louisiana; King George, Georgia; Red Island, Rhode Island. These are great ways to reinforce and allow your PCs to discover things about your environment. And when I say environments in RPGs, I think we always go to the extreme. Sometimes just different seasons can sort of change. I remember the first time I played Final Fantasy 12, one of my favorite areas was, uh, this area. This kind of a plain area, and you go out and it looks like one way, but they tell you like when the rains come, when it floods, you can't get around the same ways as you do, and of course it brings different creatures and different types of monsters and things like that. But the plains flood up, and so you can't, get to the same places that you could, when it's dry season. But when we talk about environment in a fantasy setting, I think we often think about, um, like areas that are warped by magic, or truly alive, like the Hogwarts staircases. I have a dungeon that's alive. It's the living dungeon, uh, in my world. And my advice when creating those types of things is to tie them to something mundane, right? While the staircases moved, they still made sense as staircases. And even the land through the looking glass, had elements that Alice was familiar with, that she could engage with, that allowed her to grasp what was different and what was, um, not the same about our natural world, our natural environment. And when you do that, this allows you to change the conventions that the players assume to be true. Normally you would walk or climb, but maybe it's the gravity or the sheer force of wind could change how you could do a normal task. Like maybe you just step out and the wind takes you up. And and I do have a word of caution, but who am I don't know anything. I tend to use super fantastical elements sparingly. Like the astral sea, for example, it still works basically like a sea, more or less. Not exactly. But using the mystery and discovery, you can reveal the truths and non truths, and sort of challenge assumptions and challenge conventions that they assume to be true, to your players. And they will feel like they've earned that knowledge, even though they may not understand everything that you understand about it. And that's maybe my closing point as we talk about environment. Use what you can that's familiar, but also use these other things, the fantastic, to challenge the convention. Don't just say, well, this place magic doesn't work in it just because, right? Like that doesn't sound. I mean, that sounds like an obstacle, not an environment. Um, and so my wrap up point is this: don't feel burdened to communicate to everything to a player or players about an environment. That was like we're getting into a crazy run on sentence, but don't feel like you owe the player to communicate to them everything right out the gate. Like it doesn't always have to be an information dump. If you have a cool mountain range or a forgotten city, and they just travel through the mountains, or they just decide to go around the city without exploring or learning anything, maybe they're just not into that aspect of D&D, right? Maybe they're not into the exploration. Maybe, or maybe they're in character and their character just literally doesn't care. He just wants to get through. Maybe he's focused on something else. But if discovery elements don't interest your players, that's okay. Like, and that leads me to the real advice, the final bit of advice, right? Make your world for you. Trust me, you're going to run the best game from running a campaign in a world that you like and you care about, that you love even. That's when you'll run your best D&D, is when you love the game that you're running and the world that you're running. So, environments. Use these tools: discovery, description, mystery, lore, and you can create a world that's both familiar and unknown. One they want to find out, well, who built this city? Is that important? Why is it called the Battle of Three Swords? What truly lies beyond White Plume Mountain and beyond the Great Swamp? You can use all these things to create a little bit of mystery, to draw that out, and you'll have players that love your campaign and the environments in it. All right, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something and that you enjoyed it. If you want to see a topic, let me know in the comment section, or if you have a technique or method that you use for engaging settings or environments in your fantasy RPGs or Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe even just a cool dungeon idea, drop it in the comments. Shoot me a DM. Find me on Instagram at the Nemean Beard. But until we meet again, game well.